Hi there, Brian, Stronzo5785. I come to you from a nondescript little city in the southwestern part of the United States once again. Um, Really, this is rehash of the same old polemic that we hear over and over and over again. Let me clarify a few points for you. If you get, as the gentleman indicates, if you get Christians, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs together in a room and find out what they all agree upon about God, you would not find that it is that God is one. In fact, you'd probably not find one area. Even the form of God worshipped by Muslims is called Unitarian. It is a Unitarian God. My God, being a Christian, is a Trinitarian God. So even by virtue of definition, we're not worshiping the same God. God cannot be a strict mathematical one and also three three persons, three centers of consciousness within a single complex unified God. So that point is kind of weak. You do mention that circles and squares, a circle can't be a square. Well, actually, in the world of mathematics, a circle and a square, circles and squares are topologically equivalent. They can be proven that they are the same. Also, you forget about the world of quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics don't make sense. The rules that apply there don't make sense in our realm because quantum mechanics deals with the very, very, very small subatomic particles. Einsteinian rules don't even apply there. So you can't really make that as a categorical statement like you did. Let's address now Allah not being the author of evil, and yet in Surah 354, the unbelievers schemed and planned, and Allah schemed also. And the best of schemers is Allah. That word schemer is makra, and it's always a negative term. It means to deliberately deceive for personal gain. I have been studying my Arabic, and I'll study that a little further because it needs to be fully understood. There are other instances where the same word is used. Surah 8:30, Surah 10:21, Surah 13:42. All of these instances, there are others, but I've given you 4. That should be enough to at least call into question the fact that God is not an author of evil and God does not deceive. Well, Allah does. The Quran itself describes God as being a schemer, a deceiver. There we go. Let's now address the parable of the fig tree. This is important, and it needs to be understood by Muslims. The fig tree is specifically mentioned as a specific plant. The reason for this is very simple. God in the person of Jesus was actually drawing an analogy here. Before a fig leaf actually bears figs, it has little nubs, little tiny buds that become figs. These are often eaten by people, or were eaten back in the time of Jesus. They're eaten to, while you're walking along the road. Jesus specifically referred to these metaphorically. He did. If you check the context of the passage in the book of Mark, the point was not lost on Mark, who incidentally was an eyewitness to this incident, and also an eyewitness to the life and ministry of Jesus himself, being one of the apostles. So go back and double check your story based on that knowledge. Once again, Muslims are coming along 600 years after the fact and trying to draw analogies based on what is presented in the Quran 600 years later, and drawing those conclusions and applying them to what happened for a first century Palestinian Jew, which is incidentally where Jesus lived and the time that he lived. In the context of history, you'll find that the parable of the fig tree, and it was a literally a living parable. You'll find that it makes perfect sense. A couple of references I could give, but I think it's enough to push you in the right direction. And finally, the last point, where you tell me that God had sex with Mary, that is the most repugnant, disgusting thing. How dare you? How dare you? I know your Quran makes that same implication. It doesn't actually say that, but your concept of son is so human, and you're applying humanity to the divine. You're applying the standards of humanity to the divine. Isn't that a contradiction of your own Quran? Does not your own Quran say that God is unknowable? Look, dig this. Me as a Christian equally find that concept of the Trinity, evil, disgusting, and repugnant. In the Bible, in the biblical compilation itself, it mentions the three persons of the Trinity as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. From the very first sentence of the biblical compilation, Genesis 1, chapter 1, verse 1, God is referred to as a compound plural, meaning three or more. It is further elaborated throughout the Old Testament, and it is specifically laid out in the New Testament that God is three: Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Check the book of Matthew. That will definitely answer that question for you. In so attacking a Trinity that is not Christian, you're not really attacking Christianity. And you haven't addressed the point of the historicity of Jesus. Third party, contrary, people who didn't even believe that Jesus was the Messiah wrote. Josephus, he was Jewish. He wrote that Jesus existed, that the empty tomb was there. He also gives us the story of Joseph of Arimathea and his tomb and the fact that it was empty. There are other instances. I just laid out one. Before you go telling us that Jesus was not God, you need to find something else other than a twisting and a reinterpretation of something that was laid out 600 years ago. We have more primary sources from the first 150 years. We've got arguably 150 manuscripts, definitely 80 manuscripts from the first 150 years after the actual event of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So far, Muslims have gotten us two copies, two manuscripts that could be from that time. There's more manuscript evidence for the veracity of the New Testament than there are for the top 10 classical works of classical literature combined. We've got a lot of evidence here. You did nothing to attack that evidence because you can't. Forgive me if I got a little bit upset there, but man, before you go accusing a Christian of thinking that about the Trinity, find out what we really think. Find out what we really believe. This is Brian from the nondescript little city in the Southwest. If you need me to clarify any points, please let me know, and I'd be more than happy to do it. Thank you very much for your time, and I do wish you peace and blessings.